Hi everyone. So this is going to be our first actual lecture for ANT 102. Hopefully everyone saw the previous video that I posted. Just letting you know that we will be doing this from now on. I would hopefully by next Monday be able to do a live stream of the lecture, which then you could also access later. I'm still going back and forth about it. There are some pros and cons. So for now, it'll just be the videos and I'll post them. And you can still ask me questions. And like I mentioned in that other video, there's the discussion board to ask any questions of each other or me as well. So this one will be a recap of primate anatomy and behavior. We almost finished this PowerPoint the other day on last Wednesday, but we didn't quite finish it. So I'll do a quick recap, how we usually do at the beginning of class, and then I'll just finalize those last few slides. So you have access to this PowerPoint in Canvas under PowerPoints and files. So like I said before, it's the PowerPoint on primate anatomy and behavior. So I have the PowerPoint pulled up on my laptop in front of me, so I'm going to go through it and I'll just say which slide I'm on. Like I said, 90% of this will be just a recap of what we talked about the other day. So if you are on the title slide, we'll go down to the next slide. That's slide number 2. So we talked about primate locomotion, those 4 types: quadrupedalism, vertical clinging and leaping, suspension / brachiation, and then bipedalism. There was like a slide or 2 for each of these. So some of the details, just to recap, we talked about how for quadrupeds, their limbs tend to be approximately the same length. There are 2 types: arboreal, terrestrial. In general, arboreal, those primates tend to be a little bit smaller. Their tails tend to be a little bit longer. Some of them have what's called a prehensile tail. This is for to use as like extra balance while in the trees. Versus the terrestrial quadrupeds, remember that terrestrial means on the ground. So they're on the ground, they tend to be a little more medium size. So if you're scrolling, we're on slide 4 and then now 5. So you can see some of those skeletal differences between arboreal versus terrestrial quadrupeds, with the tail length and the finger bone length, a few differences. So continuing to scroll on slide 7, the section on vertical clinging and leaping. So we watched that video with the lemur showing them using this form of locomotion. Recall that even when there aren't any trees to leap and then cling to, they're still using the same locomotion even on the ground. And you can obviously watch that YouTube video again. Continuing to scroll, slide 8. So on brachiation suspension, we talked about that's for those individuals who use their forelimbs or their arms move about in the world. So their arms are much longer. The muscle structure is much more complex because those are the limbs they're using to move about in the world. Continuing to scroll, so on slide 9, there's the link to the video that we watched on the gibbon. Let's see, slide 10. So then we talked about bipedalism, a locomotion which obviously you are all very familiar with since you are all bipeds. So this is walking on 2 limbs, your hind limbs or your legs. So using those 2 limbs to move about in the world. All of your body weight sits on top of those 2 limbs. So there are going to be some interesting changes we see like in the feet and legs. And in the next lecture, it's a whole section on bipedalism and some of the morphology. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Continuing to scroll through, let's see, slide 13. So we started talking about dentition. For primates, we talked about the dental formula. So recall that that's for in any quadrant of the mouth, so upper left, lower right, etc. The number of incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. And then we talked about those 3 general categories for food: insectivore, frugivore, and folivore. Now remember, and if you were in class with us when we watched the documentary on primates, you'll recall this, that for any of these categories and for any of these individuals, this is what the majority of their diet is. It's not the only thing that they're eating, but it is the majority of their diet. So like I said, in the documentary we watched, we saw that even folivores would on occasion eat insects. Frugivores would on occasion eat marine animals. So like it just depends. But when looking at the teeth, when looking at those molars, they can be grouped into those three categories, and it is what the majority of their diet is. Continuing to scroll, some pictures. Then I reiterated what we had talked about at great length in the last section, which was large canine teeth among primates are not indicative of meat eating. So remember that for primates, if you want to know what they are eating, you want to look at the molars, not the canines. The canines have everything to do with sexual selection that we talked about before. But also on occasion, primates will use their teeth as tools for opening things and whatever. But not for meat eating. So for other animals, other mammals, they use their teeth when eating, but primates do not. So for primates, if you want to know what they're eating, like I said, you want to look at the molars. Continuing to scroll, just some pictures of folivores, frugivores, and then the teeth, just to kind of reiterate the point I was trying to make. And then on slide 22, we start talking about sexual dimorphism, which we have talked about at great length in this class already. So you guys are already very familiar with this concept, the differences between males and females of the same species, whether that's size, shape, color. So we just talked about that again, and how this links to social structure or family structure. So we talked about solitary, monogamy, polyandry, polygyny, multi-male, multi-female. We talked about all this. And then continuing to scroll, slide 27. So then we watched a few videos. So recall we watched the video with the chimpanzees and the memory test, and they're like touching the screen. Like we were amazed by that. So feel free to watch those links, those videos again. The links are there. And then slide 28, we watched the video on equity. So the capuchin monkey very upset that he did not get a grape. So good video. Continuing to scroll, slide 29. So we watched a few videos on aggression. One I think was on infanticide, and the other was on those troops, those baboon troops. So like I said, those links are still there. You can watch those again. And let's see. And I think that was where we left off. So we'll continue. I'll just wrap up the last few slides of this lecture. So on slide 30, there are a few videos on compassion. I'm obviously not going to watch the videos right now, but you can go to those links. Sorry. I think that each video is maybe like a minute or two long if you want to do that. But the next slide, so slide 31. So this is kind of wrapping up this last part of this lecture on primate anatomy and behavior. So something called theory of mind. So theory of mind is this idea that you understand that you are an individual in the world with your own beliefs, your own desires, your own intent, your own perceptions, your own knowledge, and that you understand that other people also exist in the world with their own desires and intents and perceptions, and that those can be different than yours. So this is so having this self concept of how you exist in the world amongst other people and how they are different from you, and being able to kind of conceptualize that all in your mind requires a higher level of cognition. And we only see this, at least as far as we know, we only see this in a handful of animals, humans being one of them, and apes as well. But an interesting way that they test this, and there are two links that you can see on the slide, on slide 31, that they explain this and they give some examples. But one of the interesting ways they test this is by looking in a mirror. So you probably have done this with like your cat or your dog. You hold them up, putting them towards the mirror, and they don't know what they're looking at. They don't understand that that's them. Like they either don't recognize anything at all, or they think that like it's another dog or something. Like they don't understand. But there are certain animals who do. When they see their reflection in a mirror, they understand like that's me. They get that concept, and we kind of take that for granted. But that's like really important to be able to to be self-aware like that. So there are only a handful of animals that have this. So just keep this in mind as we're learning about primates, that humans, you know, we might be special and interesting in our own way, but that's true for every species. And there's so many things, more things that link us together than keep us separate. So for apes especially, that they have this ability, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, understand that that's them when they look in the mirror. But there are other animals, like we know elephants, and then per the PowerPoint slide, magpies and crows, highly intelligent. They have this ability. So like I said, when we see this, what this ends up telling us is that there's a higher level of cognition going on. And also there's something called, I don't know if you guys have heard of this thing before. If we were in class, I would ask, who's heard of it? Machiavellian intelligence. So basically this is the ability to deceive, like the simplified version. And how this is related to theory of mind is that, like, once you understand that you are an individual with your own thoughts, perceptions, that other people exist from you that have their own and can be different from yours, you can use that to your advantage often. So like I said, it definitely requires a higher level of cognition. But going on to the very last slide of this PowerPoint, slide 32, so language. So I know I mentioned this last Wednesday that we often, unfortunately, and it's never true, we often want to put humans as somehow like separate from other animals, and we constantly try to think of examples as to how this could be, and in reality it's never accurate. But one of those ways is language. Now, of course, we know that other animals communicate in very complex ways that we probably do not understand. And of course, we know that we have very complex language as humans, the way we communicate. But other animals can as well, even our own way. So our type of language is very symbolic, and by symbolic I mean, like, we all understand, like when I make these certain sounds, like you can conceptualize in your mind, like those sounds translate to like certain words, and those words are conceptual in your head. Like, it's a whole process, and we have certain areas in our brain that are like we have evolved to have those areas, like to understand language, to produce language, and it takes it takes a lot of a higher level of thinking and awareness to be able to communicate in these complex ways. But we know that other animals can do this, and so if you go to these links on the PowerPoint slide, you'll see, and most of you are probably aware of other primates, other apes especially, who can communicate using American Sign Language. So Coco the gorilla was a very famous example of this. She unfortunately passed away fairly recently, but other apes have been taught how to use American Sign Language. So they have the mental ability to understand, like, how to use symbolic language. So like I said, just another way that we are more similar than different. And so that pretty much wraps up this PowerPoint. The next video will be on, I think the next lecture is on bipedalism. But otherwise, I hope you guys were able to follow along with the PowerPoint. And I will update you on any changes that might happen. Otherwise, I guess stay tuned for the next video.